publisher of Minico Incorporated, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, this is one of our monthly webinars presented to self-storage owners, operators, managers, investors, developers, and other industry professionals. Today's presentation is Understanding a Self-Storage Proforma, sponsored by the Parham Group. Based in Bulverde, Texas, the Parham Group includes Noah's Ark Development, Maverick Investments, Cross Metal Buildings, Joshua Management, and Noah's Ark Development. Our presenter is Mike Parham, founder and president of the Parham Group. Mike has been in the self-storage industry for more than 25 years and has built over 7 million square feet nationwide to date. He is also the founder and president of Noah's Ark Development, a Parham Group company providing consulting, joint ventures, third-party development, site analysis, feasibility analysis, and market feasibility. This year marks the 31st anniversary of the Mini Storage Messenger, which provides the self-storage industry with in-depth news and information about timely topics and the latest industry trends. Minico also publishes a variety of other self-storage data sources, such as those you see listed. For more information, please visit ministoragemessenger.com. Before we get started, I'd like to cover a few webinar details. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing on demand from our archives at ministoragemessenger.com, where you can also find information about our upcoming webinars. This presentation should run about 45 minutes, with the remainder of the hour open to questions and answers. As such, we invite you to submit your questions throughout the webinar by typing it into the question area and clicking Send. While we will try to answer as many questions as we can at the end of the webinar, those that we cannot answer due to time constraints will be answered by Mike by email after the webinar. And now it's my distinct pleasure to turn the presentation over to Mike Parham. Good morning, Mike.
Thanks, Poppy. Thanks, everybody else, for showing up. Today we're going to be talking about feasibilities for self-storage. And before we start on that, I'm going to tell you that, number one, we're looking at an actual proforma of an operating facility that was developed by the Parham Group 4 years ago, got to break-even occupancy, and then out to base stabilized occupancy, and then over a period of time was sold just before we were getting ready to refinance it. The whole point of this is that you're going to have to understand, if you're going to understand the feasibility of economic feasibility of a project, you're going to have to understand first that this is a retail business, and it's not much different than a Walmart or a Burger King or any other retailer. The only difference is that we use real estate, and that, in saying that, everything that you're going to see today from a feasibility standpoint is going to be based on a retail business. The very first thing we're going to talk about is development variables that are specifically related to self-storage and some in general development of any other real estate. The first, of course, is land. In this particular model, we're going to talk about 3 acres, and that cost of that land is $5.74 a square foot, which is the total price of $750,000 or $250,000 an acre. The next is building area. On that 3 acres, we're going to get 65,000 gross square feet, and then we're going to have a net rentable of 60,000. Now, the reason why we're having it at 60,000 versus 65 is because we're going to lose the 5,000 feet because of the amount of climate control. And every time you have climate control space, you're going to lose 25% for entries and hallway areas. Then, of course, we go to the rents. Now, we're going to show how we came up with these rents a little later, but the first one is the rents that are generated by whether it's your units from non-climate and climate control, and also if you had RV and boat rents. Other miscellaneous income is the retail sales, truck rentals, late fees, a variety of things like that. So we're talking about, at this particular point, an annual revenue of $681,000 by the 3rd year. Now, a big financial variable. But first thing, vacancy rate. In just about every real estate, and especially in self-storage, the real estate is going to be evaluated based on not being 100% occupied, but being stabilized at 90%. Sometimes it's 85, but most times it's 90%. The average monthly lease-up occupancy In this particular case, it's 60,000 feet, so we're talking about a good rule of thumb is 2,200 square feet in today's market. But it's 2.5% at 60,000. It would be 5% if it's 30,000 square feet. We're talking about an interim interest rate of 6.5%. You'll notice that the construction loan is $3.5 million. The total development cost, which includes $900,000 worth of equity, is $4.4 million. Since it's going to be extremely important, especially for the bank, to understand where you're projecting the value of this property, these are the reason for these variables, also in the projection of the loans. So, refinancing and establishing value. First of all, if you're going to refinance or sell the property, you're going to have somewhere between 2.5% and 3% expense related to that. That'll show up in the later Proforma. If you refinance after the third year, which means in this particular case, at third year, we're going to achieve 90% occupancy, and we're going to have it long enough that if we decided to refinance, we think we can refinance this at 75% of fair market value. Now that 75% could be as much, it could be as less as 65 or 70 in today's climate, but in this particular time, it was 75%. The net refinancing proceeds is pretty close to $950,000. During the course of the first 3 years, the next 2 years after this, we're going to have a 5.5% interest rate. We're talking about a 25-year, 300 payment period. You can see what happens when you are interest only and what happens when it goes to principal. There's a big increase of $11,000. Also, there's going to be, after you come to the permanent financing, there will be a principal reduction of $136,000. And the equity required at the beginning is $905,000. The two cap rates at the bottom are very important. Cap rates fluctuate from time to time, and at one time, a stabilized property, if it got a good 10 cap rate, that was excellent for many years. It dropped down even to the 5.5 to 6 in the mid 2000s. And right now, it ranges somewhere between 7.5 and 8.5, depending on what kind of, you have an A or B type property. But in this particular case, this property was sold on a 7.5 cap. The completion rate, it had a value of 9.5 cap. That means when it was completed before it opened its doors and started operating. Well, now we're going to talk about market rent comparisons. The very first thing, if we're going to establish what rental incomes we're going to have, is that we're going to have to go on the open market. Now, you have to understand that when you're doing this Proforma, you've already gone out and done a market survey, and you've looked at the competition and everything else. But when you're evaluating what your final rents are going to be when you open the doors, this is a fine way of doing it. You'll notice that there are 5 competitors. Now, you're also going to see in just 1 second, whoa, I just went offline.
Okay, Mike, hang tight. I'm going to take the mouse back.
Oh, bear with us just a moment. I understand that Mike went offline, so give us just a minute to get him back on again. Mike, if you can hear me, you might want to close out and sign back on again.
I'll do it. Oh, I just had it back. It's back.
Okay, we have do you have control again?
I do, I think.
Yes, you do, Mike.
Okay, we're good.
Great. Excellent. Sorry, guys.
Thank you, everyone.
As you'll notice, we were talking about the 5 competitors. When I hit this, you're going to see that really, I'm hoping we're going to move forward. There we go. You'll see that the first competitor is really the only competitor within our target market area. The other 4 we're looking at as comps. And when you look down at the bottom where it says proposed rents, we are looking at like the 5x5. You know, everybody's kind of around between 34 and 36, but we know because we're a Class A facility and where we're located, we're going to go with 36. And we do evaluate each one of those rents based on what, some are exactly like our competitors, some are a little more, some are a little less, depending on our history in that market and other markets. So now we have established what rents we're going to do in this market as it relates to non-climate control rents. Same thing for climate control rents. The same thing is that competitor number one is our only competitor within the market, and the other four are the same thing. We're going through and looking at each one of those size units, and we've come up with the same proposed rents based on how we feel we're going to compete with a competitor and the history that we've had with the leasing of those units. And we established the proposed rents as the rents that we're going into. We open the market, we open the property. Now let's look at a unit mix and rent summary. Now, first of all, coming up with unit mixes could be another seminar all by itself. But in this particular case, and by the way, I will tell you how to determine that. I determine that based on entrance and exit surveys that have been done by us for over 25 years of clients. And based on the demographics, I can pretty much tell you how much climate control and non-climate control you want and what the unit mix needs to be. But in this particular case, that was done. And you'll notice that we have 359 units. Look at the top right side where it says average square foot per unit. It says 121.4. That is what we projected, which really means there's a little more density of square footage on the larger side for units than there is on the smaller. And that normally happens, especially in the southeast and the southwest. And it changes a little bit when you go to the northeast and the northwest. But you'll notice we have 359 units, and it's 43,600 square feet. There's a blended rate of 85 cents a square foot, and there's an annual revenue of $443,000. Now let's look at the temperature control units. Now you'll see the same thing. We have 148, 16,400 net square feet. Our blended rate is $1.11. And we have 218,000. You'll notice that the average square feet per unit is 110.8, which means it still has a little more square footage than larger than a 10 by 10 on square footage, but not quite as much as the non-climate control. Now you'll notice that once we've had both of those, we've established what the total number of units, the total net square feet, and our blended rate now of 92 cents. And the fact that now we have an annual income of $661,800 as it relates just to leasing units at 100% occupancy. Projected operating costs for the 60,000 net leasable. Now, operating expenses do vary somewhat from place to place, but in most cases, these are going to be pretty close to what you're going to experience. The first thing is advertising and marketing. Now, there are some very big variables in here. First of all, you can see what we normally do, but the yellow pages, depending on whether it's a one-book market or it's a 10-book market, is going to depend on how much you pay for yellow pages. Now, be careful with yellow pages because they make up less than 4% of your leases in most markets, where at one time they used to make up 80%, but that's when there weren't that many self-storage projects. Remember this rule of thumb. 85% of your clientele is drive-by traffic. Nobody eats at McDonald's by looking at the yellow pages. The same thing is if you locate your facility in the right location, that's what you're going to have too. Mail-outs, we do one mail-out or a couple mail-outs a year to a targeted market that we know of, specifically commercial customers. The promotional gifts are things that you give out when people come in or when you're going and visiting apartment complexes. The apartment complexes, brochures and cards. Brochures, we do a lease-up calculator where somebody walks in, they pick it up, and they look at all the different units and how they're stored and what can go in them, and that kind of gives them a general idea of really what they want to use. The automobile expenses, that is just for basic automobile expenses for mainly specifically for traveling if you have to do some stuff, specifically if you're marketing. If you do trucks, you'll have an operating expense for keeping up trucks, that's for sure. In this particular case, we didn't. We also, you'll have some training and education. The seminar and classes, we do send our managers to seminars at least once or twice a year. We have dues and subscriptions to the state association, and we also have technical support what helps us in doing that education also. Insurance, this is a big variable. Liability insurance is totally based on where you're located. For instance, and always remember that insurance that is provided does not include flood insurance. That is a separate insurance. Minico provides one of the, and there's several others, but Minico provides one of the best insurance programs in the business. And I've used them since they've ever had it, and I've always been taken care of greatly. But it varies because of a lot of times your location. For instance, if you're in a hurricane area, you're going to be paying twice this for the same 60,000 square or even more. If you're not in a hurricane area, you're probably looking at about this number. So liability insurance could range anywhere from $3,000 to $30,000 depending on your square footage and where you're located. So remember that. The other insurance is insurance for basically vehicles if we had them. License and permits. It's not uncommon for jurisdictions that you're going to be operating in to have license on an annual basis, permits on an annual basis, or you have to continue with permits specifically if you have elevators or detector check valves that relates to water, and you have to pay that annually. On the postage and delivery, that's specifically for mailing out to people for late notices or not mail-outs, but not mail-outs we have covered up before, but for late notices and for deliveries out and for stuff like that. The printing and forms is specifically totally related most times by using a state contract for leasing. And that's what usually costs us on an annual basis based on a project that size and the rent of turnover we have. We use a payroll processing company to do our payroll. That's something that's totally up to the whim of the developer and operator. The professional fees is $1,500 a year. That is our CPA who does a reviewed statement at the end of the year, as you can see there. And then here's the next item that's is very variable, but a lot of it has to do with what you offer in the way of products. If you offer climate control, you could have an annual expense anywhere from $1,800 to $3,000. Now that specifically is set up where you set up a maintenance contract with your HVAC contractor to come in and change the filters and do a full service on everything 4 times a year. Pest control, you're going to have that where they come in and spray and put traps out. Landscaping, that could vary greatly due to the fact that depending on how much landscape area you have and what it requires to maintain it. The shop equipment repair, we have a little shop that always goes to the manager's office so he can take care of things on the property. That's just kind of the annual amount that needs to go into basically for him to do that. The office and apartment repairs, if you have an apartment, you're going to have a little more expense than you have just as an office, but a lot of that has to do with just maintaining the office. Cleaning supplies for the entire property, and then basically other parts, miscellaneous supplies. And then if you have an elevator, you're going to require at least $3,500 a year just to maintain them, especially for state requirements. The next is telephone. These are your telephone expenses for the entire year. Internet service expenses just for having one for a year, especially if you're running an internet-based software for management. Then travel. That is for the managers or the regional managers or the people from the office to come up and do their audits and everything else. And then here's our next big one, and that is utilities. If you're going to have climate control, your electrical costs are going to go up, definitely. That could be anywhere from $10,000 to $25,000 depending on the type of climate control you're using, if you're doing humidity control or a variety of other reasons. Your water is going to basically going to vary based on what you're using in landscape maintenance. And trash removal, that's usually a trash dumpster. That pretty much stays the same. The property management fee could be anywhere from 5 or 6 or 7% if there's one at all, and that's totally variable also. Now we're down to supplies. Just general office supplies and just keeping the place up, and pens, pencils, and everything else. And then we're down to the biggie right here, and that's real estate and employees. Real estate taxes can vary drastically from market to market, depending on how they evaluate the property and then what tax levy they do based on the value. You really need to check this out, and you can usually do this real easily long before you develop by going on the tax records and find out what your competitors are paying based on how they've been evaluated and how many square feet they have. And then the last is your employee payroll. We normally have a manager, a relief manager, and then we have another relief manager from other properties that basically helps with marketing, and they're all in there. So especially if you've got 3 or 4 properties together, and some people who only have one property might just have a manager, relief manager, and the relief manager helps with the marketing of the property. The salaries vary greatly depending on where you are. I mean, there's some people who make $12,000 a year, and then some that get up to $75,000 if you're up in New York City. But you know, you can kind of figure that out pretty easily in your own market. When it's all said and done, here's one of the best checks to see if you're within, when you look at your Proforma, where you're going to show up. And I'm going to show you that in just a minute. But if your operating expenses should be somewhere on a normal facility between $2.75 and $3.50 a square foot, which basically says 26 to 28% of your overall development, your operating cost goes to that. And we're going to show you that in just a minute. Now we're going into Proforma Analysis. Now that we've found out our rents, we found out our operating expenses, now we're going to evaluate how the property's going to do. Now this is based on a 5-year deal, but 3 years getting to the point where we're looking at the 3rd year where it's stabilized occupancy of 90%. You'll notice that the gross potential income is a lot higher than what I said a while ago because we were opening at 688, now we're at 715 because we've had rent increases. You always have a 10% vacancy, so our effective gross income is $644,000. Our operating expenses are $3.26 a square foot, and look where we are, 27.36% as it relates to the total gross income. So we're right where we need to be. The net operating income is $448,000. You need to remember this number because we're going to see it a lot. It's extremely important because the bank is going to be evaluating you based on this number. You'll see the debt service at principal. Now this means at the 3rd year we've gone from interest only to permanent financing. So we are basically paying interest and principal at the same time. And then you have cash flow, $117,000 or $118,000 a year. Let's talk about the loan-to-value analysis. Once we've got that, we're going to look and see how this thing does from a value standpoint. This is what the bank's going to be spending a lot of time with. Well, there's the net operating income we talked about a few minutes ago. Now, we have projected the fair market value of this property, once it's 90% occupied, and it has that $448,000 net operating income, is $5.9 million, almost $6 million, or $92 a square foot. The total development cost is $10.10 a square, 10%. So we have like 2.5 point spread here between what it costs us to develop versus a fair market value. Our original equities was $905,000, which was 20% of that $4 million development cost. And our loan request is a $3.5 million. You'll see 2 numbers down here. For one, it says 59.11%. That is the loan to value. The loan was 59% of the actual value of the property. That is an excellent number. The bank's going to really like that. But more importantly, look at what's called DSCR, debt service coverage ratio. It says 1.36. Let me tell you how you get that. What they're trying to do is to figure out how much net operating income you have over the amount of what the payment is. A while ago, we noticed that the payment was $300-something thousand, and we have net operating income of $448, which means that net operating income has enough to pay for the debt service plus 36% more. Anything with a debt service ratio over 1.25 is usually very good. Now let's talk about the statement of cash flow. And we're going to look at this monthly, annually, and then over a 5-year period. Let's go back and review the thing again as it relates to an annual and monthly. When we first started out, our rent incomes were a lot less, and now look what's happened in the 3rd year. Again, everything is based on the 3rd year after we obtained 90% occupancy. You'll notice that we had the gross rents, we had other income of 3%, and now our total gross is $715. We have that vacancy, the effective gross income minus operating expenses we talked about, net operating income of $448 minus the debt service, and now that same $118,000, before tax cash flow. Now let's look at it from a 5-year standpoint. Okay, number one, you look across this total gross revenue. That was the gross revenue we had on the unit mix when we first started out. You notice that it went up the second year by 2.5%, and then it went up a total of 5% since the first year, and 7.5% and 10. Look at it this way: if you took a 5 by 5, which had a rent of $50, and it went up 10%, what happened? It just went to 55. So 10% is not a very high rent increase over a 5-year period. I'm being extremely conservative here. Now you'll notice on year one it says that I built a project for 7 or 8 months, and then by the end of the year I was 16.3% occupancy rate. And then on year two, because we're only leasing up 2.5%, I got up to about 46%. And then by the end of year three, the year that I'm going to refinance this project, if I'm going to keep it, I got to that stabilized occupancy. And then, of course, you can look down there that the operating expenses, they have gone up also. There's been 2% and 3%. Most of the time, what's happening is you're getting hit by taxes more than just about anything else. But they kept going up also. And then notice how the net operating income, when we get that third year, that's $448,000 again. Look, it goes to $460 and it goes to $470 by year 5. Our debt service stays the same after you get refinanced. So we're saying that at this third year, we went from, like the second year, it has no principal in it at all. The third year we refinance and it's $330, and then we're making a cash flow of $118,000. Well, if you just look at it from that standpoint, that's a 13% return, just cash on cash. But that's where we're going farther with the picture. That is, if you refinance it, and guess what's going to happen? You're going to take your money out. So really, in the fourth yield, you'll see it says infinite and infinite on fourth and fifth, because in those years, if you refinance it, most times you're going to take a large majority, if not all, of your original equity out, if you choose to. Now, let's look at what happens on this 5-year Proforma. On year 3, we decide that with a 75% of fair market value of the NOI that we had, that $448,000, that we could refinance this thing at almost $950,000. So guess what happens? Your original beginning capital balance was $405, so there was an excess of almost $44,000 in the refinancing. So at year 3, you have no basis in the land. You made another $44,000 on top of it, and now you have an infinite return. That's if you refinance it. And from fourth year right then on, then all the cash flows just coming directly, straight to you, and you have no basis. So it's an infinite return. Let's take a look at it from a standpoint if you wanted to sell the property. And that's those same years. Look at year 3. That NOI of 448 at a cap rate of 7.5 was almost $6 million. You take the loan amount, and basically the loan amount and the capital's out of it, because your capital's in there too, and you have a sales expense, and guess what? You're talking about net proceeds of $1.3 million if you sold it. We sold it in year 4. Look at what our rate went from basically $6 million to $6,140,000. Take out your loan amount, plus there's a debt that's coming out of it, because the debt that's coming out of it is like $140-something thousand a year. And my sales commission, which was 3% in this particular case. So my net sales proceeds after sales was $1.6 million. If I'd gone to the next year, look what would happen. This is an actual case that in 4th year we sold this project at 7.5 cap at that price. So, what are the investors' return? Well, number one, if you're all you MBA guys out there, and I'm one myself, number one, I don't do an internal rate of return, because there's so many variables to it that you can make it look whatever you want it to look like. I look at it from the standpoint is that I put my money in at year 1, and I'm looking at my return every year after that. So let's take a look at the year 3 and year 4. At year 3, I've made, with the sale and everything else, I've made almost $1.5 million on it. So my return, if you look at what I put into it originally, was 163%, but from that standpoint, if it's the 3rd year, it's a 54% return on my money. But you got to remember, if I refinance this, I'm not going to have the sale, and I've got an infinite return after that. But let's say that I didn't refinance it, I sold it the 4th year, and I'm making with the cash flow to this point plus the sales proceeds, you can get a general idea what's happening. Okay, so by the 5th year, I've basically made all my money back twice over, but I've made about a 52% return on my money over that 5-year period. Statement of available cost. This is very important. What are you going to pay to get to this point? Now, we're going to talk about an 80% loan with a 20% equity position. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, in this particular market, if you can find interim financing, it's probably going to be 70-30 or 65-35. But again, it doesn't make any difference as it relates to the Proforma. All you got to plug that in. It's still the same thing. And the statement of development costs are not going to change that much. It's just what you're going to have to put in the way of equity. We remember land. We paid $750,000 or $250,000 an acre for the land. Our construction costs, I break these down into 4 major categories. Because we do construction and design and metal buildings and everything in-house, I know exactly slab and above my storage buildings what they're going to cost. I know what my apartment office or my office is going to cost. And I know that the security, the fencing, and the entry control systems that I put in, and security means entry control gates. It also means the cameras. All the things that go with security are all involved in those numbers. So the only real number is a variable is site work and utilities, and that varies greatly from site to site. That number could be anywhere from $6 a square foot to $16 a square foot. A civil engineer is extremely important in just about everything you do, in fact, specifically up front, and we're going to talk about that a little later. Permits and fees drastically change from market to market. In San Antonio, Texas, for a 60,000 square foot project, I may be paying $28,000 in permits and fees. In Florida, I could be paying $300,000 because some of those fees are concurrency fees that says I have to pay for the right for my customers to use the highway, and they're usually very exorbitant, especially if the highway is over capacity. The design fees, it kind of gives you a general idea of what it's going to cost you for architects, civil engineers, a structural MEP engineer, your landscape architect, and that could be a little high. Any consulting you have to do at the preliminary, like site plans and everything else, to get you to the point during your due diligence period. Now, by the way, there's 2 costs in development costs. There's hard cost, which makes up land construction and your signage, and everything else is soft cost. Your hard costs are going to make up pretty close to 78% of your total overall development cost, and the rest is going to be soft cost. We're getting into the soft costs right now. If you pay somebody all the time and effort to do the market analysis and preliminary designs, economic feasibilities, and these are extremely high numbers in here. I mean, most market analysis would be less than 10. Economic feasibility would probably be around 12 or so. But the bottom line to it, these are all soft costs. These are things you're going to experience. They're just going to vary from place to place. From testing and surveys, you're going to have a soils report on every project if you're going to get it bank financed. You need it anyway before you can design your slabs and your paving. Environmental phase 1, if it fails, you'll probably have to have an environmental phase 2. That's going to be required by the bank. You're going to have a topographic and a boundary survey. That's probably on the high end, but we had to do a lot to recreate the survey, so that's why it was. The preliminary and financial platting, if you have to go through the platting process because the property is not platted, that could be anywhere from $2,000 to $15,000. The next soft cost you're going to run into is legal expenses. Now, legal expenses contain your partnership documents that you're going to have for your partnership. It's going to have any of your legal documents for closing, and it's also including what the bank is going to charge you for their legal expenses to get to closing. Now, insurance. This insurance is insurance for builder's risk insurance. It only goes into effect when you start construction, and the day you get your CO and you stop writing, it goes away. And then your other insurance is an operating, what we saw in the operating expenses a while ago. Closing costs. Title policy. It varies from state to state. Some states that might be $3,000. In other states that may be $100,000. Florida is extremely expensive. Texas is expensive, not quite as much as Florida, but in certain places are very expensive. You need to get to the title company and find out what the title expenses are going to be, including all taxes that will be charged. Appraisals range from anywhere from $3,000 to $6,000 depending on where you are in the country. That 1% could be what the bank's going to charge you for putting the loan together. It could be 0.5%, or it could be 1%, or it could be 2%, but you will know that when you get a bank commitment. I would always just put 1% in there just to be careful. Miscellaneous closing costs or any other taxes that need to be paid before you close on the property or whatever. So just something there is a little bit of a contingency. Now, the interest and lease carry is extremely important. You'll see the construction interest, which you're going to see a little later on how that's figured. But the lease-up interest is how much money is it going to take before you finally get to break-even occupancy, both at interim interest when you're only paying interest, and when you get to permanent financing when you're paying principal also. And in this particular case, and we never got to this number because we sold her in the middle of it, but to get to break even, it was going to cost us another $425,000 before we broke even, and we didn't have to come out of pocket. So that was included in the loan. And by the way, most banks really like to see this because they want to make sure that you have the money to take care of your responsibility all through the point of when it breaks even. Here's some other there's some other soft costs except for project signing. On furnishings, normally what it costs to put a computer in, the office and equipment that you've got, the office forms and supply, the golf cart. If you're going to buy a moving van, which I really don't recommend you do, but if you're going to buy one, you're going to have another $20,000 on top of that. But tools, carts, dollies are the carts used for people to use in climate control, and also decorating expense where somebody can help decorate. The advertising is project signage, which could be anywhere from building signage to reader boards to a pylon sign out in the front. General marketing, all the things you're going to do when you open the store and when you maintain it the first year. The opening marketing campaign, all the stuff you're going to do to open it up. We usually have a grand opening and a variety of other things. And then property management startup expense, coming in and all the labor and all the things it's going to take to get the store totally up and running, including hiring managers and training them and everything else. The last two things are totally variable to what you want to do. When I third-party developer somebody, I charge anywhere from $50,000 to $250,000, which might be anywhere from 1 or 2% fee, because I'm doing everything for them, and I have a lot of people I do that for. But I'm doing it for myself. And I even charge myself for that because I have to pay for my operating around here. But the other thing is contingency. Depending on the size of the project, I like to have anywhere from $25,000 to $100,000 to take care of things that are unforeseen, which normally happen through the civil engineer or through the city coming back or the state or the county coming back and saying, I want something else, after they've already told you something else. So just be careful with that. When it's all said and done, you'll notice that, again, here's our loan amount of $3.5 million, and here's our equity, which was $905,000 originally. Now, how are we going to disperse these funds? A large majority of the funds are going to be dispersed at closing, which you're going to see in just a second. And the rest of it is going to be finished during construction. You'll notice that this is your budget on the left side, your cost for the land, construction costs, all the costs we just went through on the budget. And then at closing, look what happens. Well, first of all, they're going to make you put your equity in first. So you put your equity in, but you still had $262,000 worth of expenses over your equity contribution. And so the next month, you have your first month of construction, and so you can see I had paid for my insurance there, and then I've had contingency, which I've just taken the $100,000 interest and just spread it out over the same over. You'll notice that because I drew $262,000, that I have interest this application on $114.20. You'll notice it's added to the next. So each month it's adding, and it's basically telling you what your cumulative loaded date is and how much money per application and how much money you've charged are basically out of interest lease carry. This is month 1 through 3. Look at month 4 through 6. And remember, you're going to, if you have a 6-month or an 8th-month construction period, it's going to take you 9 months to spend it because you have retainage. Here again, on the 4th month, we've looked back and what the third month application was, and we draw interest to pay for that interest during that period of time. Here's our cumulative interest, and it keeps going our total application. When we get down to close to the end, where we're getting down to the month 7 through month 9, you'll notice that month 9, we're pretty much at the end. We basically have spent everything. In fact, I'm going to go the next month to show you the sums. When we get down to here, we've spent almost all the money except the budgeted amount that was left there for interest lease carry during operations. Now, let's look at the investment summary. This is something I put at the very beginning of each bank package and business plan that I send out. We had 3 acres. We got 65,000 square feet, which is almost 46%. Net leasable, which was 60,507 units. Our scheduled annual rental income, this is as of the 3rd year, is basically the rental income from the units, the miscellaneous income, 3.10%. Total gross income of 715. We minus out the 10%. Our operating expenses, there's that 448,000 again, net operating income, and the debt services was 330, and our net cash flow is 118. Now you got to remember, this is a refinance. This is principal and interest. What's happened here is you're making $118,000 after you have no basis because your money's back. You've been paid back through refinancing. Here we go again. At that 3rd year, your property's worth almost $6 million, a 7.5 cap. We went ahead, and this is your first mortgage loan, okay? And what we did, we hadn't refinanced it, but look at this debt service coverage ratio again, 1.36, and loan to value. These are the 2 most important things a bank are going to look at. And they could even structure your loan based on you achieving both of these different ones for the debt service ratio or loan to value. Now, before we get into questions and answers, I want to throw a few other things to you right now. One of the most important things you need to pay attention to when you're putting an analysis together is specific a financial analysis, is you got to understand that there are at least 20% of all your costs are going to be related to where you are, specifically with entitlements, including what is it going to cost to go through the entitlement process of getting the site ready, because of where you are, what kind of permits and fees are you going to be paying, what are the taxes you're going to be paying, and they affect not only your development costs, but they're also going to affect greatly your operating costs because of operating expenses. Spend a lot of time researching that out. Don't just use figures of something I've thrown at you at $3 or $3.50. Go and find those out and really concentrate when on operating expenses on specifically taxes, because that's your biggest variable. At this point, I'm going to kind of turn it over and see if Poppy's got any, or Robin's got any questions that need to come my way. I'll see if I can answer them for you.
Okay, we have some questions, and for those of you who are attending the webinar, if you have any questions, now would be the time to send them in. Our first question for Mike is, Mike, is a 7.5 cap rate realistic in today's market? I'm seeing something closer to a 9.5 caps for A properties.
Minico just came out, and I can't remember who sponsored it recently, but they came out with the regions of the country as it relates to what the going cap rates are. Let me tell you this. If you have a first-class facility, a 7.5 is a Class A facility, you can still get 7.5. I would say most often it's going to be between an 8 and an 8.5 for a Class A facility right now. If you're talking about a typical Class B property, they're going from 9 to 10. And anything that's a Class 3 type property that's not in a major market area, they could go all the way to 15. We went from 10 with a Class A down to 5.5, and we're kind of settling around an 8 right now for Class A properties.
Okay, next question. I'm sure everybody wants the answer to this one, Mike. Are construction loans available today, and if so, who is lending?
That's a tough one. All I can tell you is my past experience. We have the Noah's Ark line. We're up to 38, and this is our third portfolio. The other two portfolios we got bought out by some other REITs. But I was developing up until 2008, six to seven a year. I'm developing one and maybe two this year, and maybe one or two next year. It is going to be extremely difficult. It's extremely difficult to find interim financing right now. If you have the only reason why I have it is I developed up a relationship with some major banks, national banks, that over a long period of time. And for instance, between 2004 and 2008, I did $162 million in loans, and all of them have pretty much been paid back except for $12 million, and either through sales or refinancing or whatever. That gives me a little better option than most people are getting in business for the first time. However, if you have a relationship with a bank, no matter how small or how big, everybody needs to start small and work themselves out. Here's a fine example. I'm doing a project in San Antonio right now. I'm doing 30,000 feet. It's a 5-acre site, and the rest I'm doing in uncovered, covered, and enclosed RV boat storage, which is really an untapped market. I know that I'll be doing one or two phases after this. My first phase is valued enough that I can get a loan, and I have the equity. I have had two investors that invested into it. But the great thing about it is that when I do the second phase, when I'm actually going to do the second or third phase, I don't need any more equity because the property has grown in value, and the value covers the equity requirement. And the other thing too is that the cost for developing a second and third phase is almost half of what it did for the first phase because of all the startup things you had to do in the first phase you don't have to do later on. So my first phase, to give you an idea, had an 8% return on cash. My second phase had a 42% return cash on cash. And my third phase was an infinite. So the whole point in here is that you need to take it in smaller bites, and then you can find banks that will basically do that. I will tell you this. The people who are out there loaning money are not what you're used to right now. For instance, I used to use GE Capital and a variety of large companies like that for refinancing properties, stabilized properties. My Noah's number one, which I'm in right now speaking from that, is our offices for the 5 companies. And I refinanced that, and the best deal I got was a local savings and loan. So, I mean, and it was an excellent deal. So look out. What I'm saying is don't get, if you see what everybody else is doing, don't go that way. Find something nobody else is doing. Go out there, and if you have to, find you a loan broker. I paid 1% for a loan broker to help me find money. It was the best thing I ever did in my life because I got one of the best deals I ever got. I did the same thing on finding this interim financing. It was a bank that's not in that market, but wanted to be, basically wanted to make some loans. So they're out there. And find you a good loan broker. Go ahead.
All right, next question. Mike, I'm also hearing the national occupancy rate is around 75%. What are your thoughts?
I haven't seen it that low. I mean, I can tell you that most of the markets I'm in right now are the Southwest, Southeast, or South Central. I'm kind of below the Mason-Dixon line now. But I will tell you this, we have operating properties in all those places, and I do have 3 that are in lease-up still, and I'm leasing up in markets that people have written off as being the worst markets in the country. But again, if you have the right location, you've done your homework, you've developed a retail business, not a retail property. I mean, not just a real estate property, but a retail business. And you do all those things properly, people are going to want to come in. Now, I won't tell you this. Why somebody comes in during a good market is going to be totally different from why they come in a bad market. But I lease up well just in either one of them. A lot of things that you're seeing when you hear this, I've dropped from 90% to 75 or 77, is because people were already in a saturated market, and people had new competitors built on top of them, And guess what? When the market started going down, they went down because everybody was struggling and there was a price war that went on. Well, guess what? I try to eliminate those markets that anybody can build in. So I try to build in the hardest places in the country. So I don't have any competitors, and then I don't have to deal with that later on down the line. And there's another way to increase your value. So, you know, when everybody else says, well, I can't get but an 8.5 or 9 cap, I'm getting a 7.5 or 8 because I did those things. So I wouldn't put a lot of stock into it of where where occupancy rates are, because I'm seeing properties right now that are doing just fine. If you're in a market that's saturated with competition, you know, you got a problem. If you've done your homework about finding a market that you can get into that can't be tapped or can be limitedly tapped, and you've got, even if they did, you have the advantage, then you're going to be able to do well and not worry about too much what happens in the economy.
All right, next question. What is the maximum ratio of square footage per capita for a new project?
Oh, gosh. Number one, every market, first of all, we're in a retail business, and every market is different. To kind of give you an idea, Texas right now is faring probably better than any other state, but it has the highest number of square feet per capita than anywhere else in the country outside of Montana. But you know what? The occupancy rates they're okay. I mean, the two hottest markets in the country right now are Houston and I'm not say hot. I'm saying they have 3 or 4 properties going on, and Dallas and in the Austin area. And guess what? Dallas is almost 11 square feet per person. Houston is like 12. I developed in Florida where most of the stuff was below 5. A lot of it has to do on the people's understanding of self-storage and what they've been used to for a long time. If it's relatively new in a market, you're going to be teaching these people how to use self-storage for a long time. If you're in the state of Texas, you really don't have to do too much of that. In other places, like Phoenix, is the same way. But the answer to your question here is there's not a maximum. Okay, what I do is this into a market. Number one, the almanac that Minico puts out does an excellent job of telling you in major markets where equilibrium is and if a market's overbuilt and underbuilt. And so I would talk to Poppy about that as being extremely important, just because it does save a lot of time. But what I go out and do is this, personally. I go out and check them. I go out and find an area that I know that there are 4 or 5 properties in a radius that are all 90% occupied or 85% occupied, okay? And I go and I do a trade area around those areas, or I do a radius around those areas, and I try to find out exactly how many square feet per person that there's right now. If let's say that there's 6 square feet per person and they're 90% occupied, well, I know anything below that's going to do fine in that market. But if I tried to build something that was 7 or 8, I'd be taking a chance. And you can do that on your own as long as you have a way of getting hold of demographic servers. I will tell you one thing about demographics. When the new census comes out, it's only good for about a year. Try to find somebody like we do. We use a postal count. It could be up to 500% off. I mean, for instance, Florida has when they do a postal count, it's who receives mail. When they do census, it's who's living there. Well, if half your people are living in New York or Chicago half of the year, you're not going to show up on the census. So they'll tell me that I have a demographic report that says there's 4,000 people, and when I do a postal count, there'll be 45,000 people. So be careful where you get your information.
That's great advice. We have that challenge every year. Next question is, in your experience, what is the difference in vacancy rates between first floor storage and second floor storage?
My experience is that you build and you design and build only the way people live. If you live in San Antonio, Texas, this is an example, that is the 7th largest city in the country and is spread out over a 30-mile, 40-mile radius, gigantically spread out, one of the largest in the way of area, and everybody's living in a single-family home pretty much, then I wouldn't be doing any multi-level. I did a multi-level downtown in San Antonio, Texas, but because all of my customers were commercial customers, lawyers, doctors, and people like that, and they had a high-rise, and people lived downtown on a high-rise. The ones that were built out on the outskirts didn't make it at all, where the ones that I built, the typical single-story ones, did fine, okay? So if you live, and let's put it this way, if you're in downtown Chicago, everybody lives 4 or 5 or 6 stories high. They don't have a problem storing that way. But go out in the suburbs and you're going to have a problem. So try to always duplicate how people live.
Next question, should an existing self-storage business ever be bought based on Proforma, or should we always use trailing 12-month actuals?
Both, pretty much. But let me explain that. Number one, I look at where the occupancy is right then, based on those present rents. I go back and try to find out what the economic occupancy is based on the physical occupancy as relates to square footage. Units I don't ever look at. I look at physical occupancy based on square footage and economic occupancy. And let me tell you that you're always going to have a difference between those depending on just what units people are leasing. If you have a larger vacancy of smaller units, then your economic occupancy is going to always be lower than your physical occupancy. If it's the other way around, you got people leasing more smaller units, they lease your unit. They're smaller than larger units. If you're leasing a 5x5, you might be getting $2 a square foot. You're leasing a 10x30, you might be getting 60 cents a square foot on a monthly basis. So that's going to throw you off a little bit. The tailing thing just kind of gives you an idea of basically what the occupancies have been. Has it constantly stayed that way, or has it, it's been building up to this point, or it's been that way forever? That's what I look at that for, because let me tell you something. If you're 90% occupied in a way of physical or economic, unless something gigantic happened in the last 12 months, I could care less. The people that are out there buying are buying incomes. The difference between you and a public storage or one of the REITs is the fact that you're in the self-storage business. They're in the money business. If their clients or people are going to put several $100 million in, they have private clients too, but if you're a pension fund and the cost of your money is 1.5% for what you're paying out to your customers, and you can put that money out and it gets a 10% return, you've got an 8.5 margin spread between it, you're happy. But most times it's like 5. You and I'm not going to sign on a $5 million loan if I'm only going to get a 5% return. I'm waiting to get a 50 or 60 or 70% return. So the people who are in the industry, there's different reasons why they're in. They're either in the money business or in the self-storage business. If you're an independent operator, you're in the self-storage business, and so you're not much different than any other retailer out there.
Okay, we have time for a few more questions here. What premium, if any, can I expect for climate control rent versus non-climate controlled rent?
The difference varies from market to market, but I'd say at 20% is kind of the usual. But I have markets where I'm getting a 40 or 50% increase on it. Climate control is extremely important when you have high humidity areas. That's the reason why Florida, you got to have it in Florida. Houston, places that are on the coast that have high humidity, or any other place that has humidity that goes over 40 or 50%, it makes a gigantic difference. And for instance, in San Antonio, I'm using this as an example, but San Antonio, probably the most you'll get in a mix is 20 or 30% climate control versus non-climate control. You go to Houston, it could be 50 to 100%. And that's because if you walk outside of Houston, out of your house and go to your car, you might need to take a bath after you get there because the humidity is so bad. Phoenix, it's a little different animal there. It's not a case that they don't have humidity. I mean, if they get to 20%, it's a bad day, okay? But you know what they have there? Because they don't have humidity, they have people that are now starting to put in humidifiers in that actually add moisture to the air so that they don't have warping or things with furniture, okay? So, and then up north, most time climate control is more heating than air conditioning. I will tell you the industry standard is pretty much no hotter than 85 and no colder than 50.
All right, I think we have time for one more question. What value do you place on the addition of a manager's apartment, and how much is the free rent percentage, percentage-wise included in the manager's salary?
That's going to be a difficult one. Let me just tell you this. I don't ever, from a standpoint of whether I have an apartment or an office, or both, depends on what the people are acclimatized to in the market. The reason why we had offices to begin with is because we didn't have any security 30 years ago. And so when a property was built, it had no gates, no security, no anything. People could drive down the lanes anytime they wanted to. And they thought if they put an office on the second floor, an apartment on the second floor, that people would get to the point that somebody's there 24 hours a day looking at things. Well, that didn't happen. And there were times when most units in most places that had that were having 30 or 40 break-ins a month. And so the entry control system came involved, and when the entry control basically kept vehicles from going in, and especially when you started adding the security, I can tell you that offices are extremely important for leasing, but the apartments have dwindled. When I first started in the industry over 25 years ago, I would say it was 90% office apartments. I would say, in fact, in the Messenger that just came out, it's less than 50. It's like 40 now on the new. So a lot of it's based on if people are acclimatized to that and I have to have it, then I'll do it. But most of the time I have a nice office, and my offices are big, and they have play areas, and they center around women. And if you haven't learned this yet, 82% of everybody who's going to lease from you are women. So you do things in your design for that. They come between 2:30 and 5 in the afternoon, and Monday through Friday and all day Saturday. And so I tailor all my interest in the security and everything else into that instead of putting it in an office. And frankly, I haven't had anybody complain about it. So, I've saved money, but I put a lot of that money back into security and other design elements specific for. Think about this: if you have a lawyer, the secretary comes out to lease. Right? If you have a doctor, the office manager comes out to lease. So, and most of the time, because of the disposable time in the afternoon, the women come in and do the leasing. I will tell you this: we have over 95% of people who move in are men. Okay, but I wouldn't say that offices. Office is extremely important, but I would kind of back off on apartments unless it's just predominantly apartments in that market that your competitors.
All right. Thank you very much, Mike. Great questions and answers. We'd like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. We certainly hope we provided you with some useful information to assist you in your self-storage endeavors. As a reminder, you will receive an email within the next few days for the link to the archived presentation, so be sure to watch your inbox for this email. And our next webinar will be held on March 27th, presented by Derek Naylor. The topic will be Marketing Strategy versus Tactics, a game-changing marketing distinction in our industry. To register, please visit our website at ministoragemessenger.com. Thank you again for attending, and have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thanks, Miniko.
Thank you, Mike.
Bye-bye.